I've been sending things out in the text box, in the chat box, excuse me. But Jim, I have one initial question. It was one of the most recent slides you just went to, the success factors, right? Could you talk a little bit more about that? The four success factors, what you see on each, how they make sense in our world, how we can implement them, so to speak.
Sure. Well, I mean, once you get into anything, it's pretty important to ensure that everybody is aligned to what the end goal is. Because if you don't do that, you're going to get scope creep, or you're going to get near the end and you're going to say, hey, look at this great thing that I've done. And the boss says something like, well, that wasn't exactly what I was thinking. Yeah, there's no need for that. So got to get that criteria laid out up front. And that might be challenging. Then there's the sponsors and stakeholders thing, and everybody on this phone call probably realizes the difference, but a lot of people don't realize that a sponsor is somebody who can commit resources, people, time toward a goal, and stakeholders are people who can influence, but probably can't control those resources. You've got to have those. Or you've got to know that the sponsor has got 3 or 4 other things in the hopper, and so you might come in, not first all the time. But to have that conversation is essential. And if you don't know who the sponsor is, don't start the project. And then the other couple are, where the rubber meets the road, which is once you start implementing, you better have some early adopters. And when you do have those, you want the yes people as early adopters, not naysayers. And then you want to reward those folks as the initial successes come rolling in. So I think it's relevant for whatever we do, whether it's at home or at work.
Okay, a question came up from one of the participants in the chat box. Do you see a difference in approaches to performance improvement versus the redesign of work or performance we're now undergoing? Or do performance improvement approaches help us create the path?
Yeah, I think I think the latter. Going back to the whole notion of jobs are changing, we have tools in our toolkit for facilitating those things. But here we are in day 109. I mean, some consulting engagements take till 209 to bear any results. And we don't have that kind of time right now. So use our mental technologies to make these things happen. And honestly, people who call themselves performance improvement people ought to be right in the middle of the target for helping organizations transform into the organizations they need to be in this whole pandemic situation. I think we're well armed and well informed to help facilitate these changes.
One thing you mentioned in the middle of your presentation was the single question that you mentioned, where you didn't need to go through this long thing. You said you just have to ask, what can we do better around here? That question, which is straightforward, direct English. What are some of the results when you've done that question? How have you implemented it? How have you made that work?
It's pretty interesting what's happened. Kind of going back to this nurse thing as an example. I mean, you'll see everything from water on the bathroom floor, which could be indication that maintenance wasn't in there, or it could mean that there was a leak. There's a lot of things. This could mean a lot of stuff. Right here you see two menu items, as a matter of fact. One, interestingly enough, by a chief nurse, and the other by the CEO, who's doing his own rounds. Okay, that's this Mike Kramer guy. But when you dig down into that, you'll see that there was the patient was confused about how to use the menu. You'll also see things in the system like safety issues. You'll see practical things like, these nurses have carts that have some essential supplies on them. And if they're not where the nurse needs it, why can't that cart be positioned someplace else? So you'll see all kinds of things. Some are little and some are big that nurses are asking people to attend to. And what's interesting, I'm going to just kind of show this chart again. I just happen to know this for this particular client. This person here, Hampton, is the head facilities person. And look at all the facility issues. I mean, they've put in like 600 or 700 issues. This guy's gotten, you know, almost 100 of them. This next person here is the COO, and has assigned himself 60 plus issues. So these are not like, you know, some rinky-dink little issues. Some of them might be. But, you know, the one thing I will say about nurses, especially when we hear a lot about nurse strikes and things like that in the news, in 3 years that we've been doing, it's 4 maybe now, we haven't seen a single issue that's been, I don't get paid enough. So the nurses, the people using this system are really, really concerned about the way the hospital functions and the way patients are being taken care of. To me, that was a phenomenal insight.
Amen.
Amen. Earlier in the presentation, you talked about the hooking people into the language. Would you like to explain more about that consultants often do?
Yeah, well, it's harder for consultants to do it because, you know, if I'm just saying a word to you today, it'd be hard for you to take it and then, you know, kind of have it filter out through the your organization. But a lot of tools that we get as foisted upon us as, you know, employees in an organization are whatever is sold to the company. And so you get it in the provider's language, you get it in their terminology and things like that. But you might call a task an activity, and I might call it a step, and, you know, it doesn't really matter because whatever I call it, my organization understands, and whatever you call it, your organization understands. But tools, in our opinion, the reason we created the structure that we created here at Ops, tools need to be flexible enough to take on the language of the client. And it goes back to those 4 success factors. If you can present the tool in the language of the client, people are going to use it. If you put it in your language, then it's a crapshoot. And when I first started this company, I got my first meeting of the board and I told them what we were going to do and create this performance improvement technologies. First question the guy asked, and he ran a bunch of airports outside the United States. He says, is this a technology company or is it a consulting, or is it a technology company masking as a ruse for consulting? Because they know that a lot of times what you're trying to do is sneak something in behind the back door, right? And people see this stuff all the time. I say, oh, we'll give you the tool for free. You know what that means? It's no good. And they're trying to sneak in there. So there's a one where, you know, you're trying to get that little thin edge of the wedge in, and the other is you're trying to foist your terminology on people. Don't do that. Use the language of the customer, and you're going to be a lot more successful.
Thanks. We have a question. I'll just read it as it came in on the chat box. How can we improve employee engagement with the new norm of telework?
Yeah, I think this is going to be great. Well, one, use a virtual tool, and people are going to have all kinds of ideas. Instead of saying, you know, the lighting doesn't work, or my window's dirty, or, you know, I don't like staring at the parking lot, or I don't feel safe walking to the parking lot, and some of those more on-site types of things, people are going to have all kinds of other issues about communication, meeting hours, how to collaborate. I think it's going to even be more healthy. So find a tool that you like that promotes this kind of ongoing dialogue, which is what this thing that I was showing you earlier does. It's always available to people, right? You get on your phone and you have an idea, you put it in there. And somebody says, got it. And it's not just somebody, it's somebody who you recognize as a leader. So however you want to set that up, it's super easy to do. And I'm not here to, sell this thing. It'd be great if somebody wanted to use it, but I'm just here to say this is an example of a tool that can be used anywhere in the world. And what you'll start doing is aggregating some of these ideas. Like over here, you can see, I got equipment issues, issue log issues, nursing issues, patient issues. This goes back to a couple of things. One, on this particular topic, aggregating people's ideas into chunks so you can start solving them as a group. But the other is it's a representation of how this tool can be changed to support the client's language. So whoever's asking, if you want to use this thing, let me know and we'll get her going.
Okay. You mentioned,
yes, sir. Miller.
Jim, we have a question from Tom. In this age of COVID, how do we deal with employees, customers, etc., that are afraid of the disease and don't want to go out? And that's close to home, believe me.
amen.
Well, if they're not coming, you got to go to them. And you're going to go to them just like I'm coming to you right now. And I think that's the net of it. You're going to have to be careful, though. We were talking about this earlier about kind of getting Zoom absorption. Yeah, and but people aren't coming out, and I don't know what the client situation is in the question as it was posed, but if it's a retail thing, it's going to be a pretty big issue.
Yeah.
If it's more of thought leadership types of stuff, then you can do it just like we're doing it today.
I've got a couple of clients, but the big one from last night is a church where people want to come to the building for the fellowship, the friendship.
Yeah.
Their children are saying, don't open the church. Our parents will get sick. So I'm torn between those things, and the management of the church is worried about liability.
Well, we've got, this is personal now, this is not a professional opinion, just so you know. Churches in particular seem to have done a pretty good job, some of them, of creating these virtual worship experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen one a bunch of times from down in Southern California, near Newport Beach, where one of my daughters does her religious activities. And the level of sophistication in these productions is unbelievable. And I don't think they've lost anybody. Almost all of their giving is already done online. So it's not like, they're tied to the passing of the basket. And so, I would think that people are not going to go to church. I mean, they're canceling weddings, right? So I think try to take advantage of some of those technologies that are out there specifically for churches and houses of worship would be the way to do it. Don't try to force anybody in order to collect $5 from somebody, right?
That's not the problem.
No,
Why don't we, another question that popped up in the text box from Kathleen, what messages most resonate with stakeholders and sponsors, when considering this kind of tool?
well, it depends. It could be cost, it's a typical cost, quality, quantity, timeliness stuff. It's the ability to aggregate data, the ability to hear from certain stakeholders. For the infection control stuff, I got to tell you, that's straightforward. And one of the things I point out about that is we did not develop that tool in March. We saw infection control as an issue because of conversations we had with administrators, directors of nursing, infection preventionists, corporate leaders 6 years ago. And it just so happens that now, of course, it's valuable. Infections have been hurting a lot of people for a long time in nursing home environments. So the thing there is, how can I reduce infections but save time? Because the one thing that we know, and this is true in most organizations, but I'm going to say it's particularly true in nursing homes, they operate on a tiny little staff, and they don't have one more thing they don't have time for one more thing to do. But when you listen to what your states are asking of nursing homes, or what the nation is asking, here, just fill out this one more report, just do this one more thing, just go to this one more website, just do this one more survey. They don't have time for that. So what you get is crummy information, because they go, well, I've got to do it, so I'm just going to do it fast. So I think cost, quality, quantity, timeliness pretty much runs the gamut of things that we've heard. And you just have to understand going in what you think the client is going to be asking for in order to respond to it. Because if they don't come up with one of those things, if they say something like, well, I want to take better, I want to keep better track of what my employees are doing, you know, believe me, don't think it hadn't come up. It's not going to work. And to that last point, even though I was making a snide comment, I was in DC a few years ago, and we had built exactly, using the core platform, exactly what the stakeholder wanted. Exactly. So the day came where we were going to present it to like the next level leadership, which was about 12 people. We go in there, and I'm telling you, it was arm crosser city, right? These guys said straight up, we see what's going on here. You guys are trying to build something for you. And, you know, they get called out on it. And I'm just sitting there, you know, I was the bad guy for a minute because, you know, we're the ones who had built it. Then the bosses, to their credit, said, well, what do you guys want? And they started rattling off things. So we started with 4 functions. We ended up with 18 different functions that address specific areas of the business, and buy-in was near instantaneous. It took us about 2 months to respond to that, but it was huge. So, you know, that's, you were 100% exposed when you present a tool that looks like it's going to creep up on people.
Jim, we're about 2 minutes from our close time. One last question here. Are there situations where this kind of approach won't work well? For example, where the prescribed behaviors are constantly changing or emerging? Sounds like today.
No, you know, if people worry about behaviors, then yes. You know, there's always the risk that these things won't work. But if they're focused on accomplishments, they always work. And so the key is to be sure that the behaviors that you want are manifested in a tool, and because that's part of the culture building. And then the results will be driven from that. So they basically always work if you start with that front thing, that going back to Vince's question about, you know, the 4 success factors. If you start with the clear expectations of what the success criteria are up front.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.